Today, I want to tell another personal story. This is going to be my story about getting my first legal job, which is coupled with my passion of helping law students and attorneys to do so and rethinking the process of getting a legal job. And one important thing that's near and dear to my heart is that nobody really addresses the psychology of doing so. Today I want to capture some of the things I did right, either by accident or intentionally, both from a procedural standpoint and from a psychological standpoint. And on that end, importantly, what I'm going to show is the mindset shift, or shifts plural, that helped me and which may help you, along with some pitfalls I ran into that you may want to avoid. I'm Griffin Bridgers, and this is 10 Minutes with Griffin. So as I said, today's episode 166 is all about just getting a legal job. Now, even though I'm not really giving legal or tax advice in this presentation, I want to remind you, as always, that this presentation is not intended to substitute for legal or tax advice, nor is it soliciting the services of any sort of recruitment type of arrangement. And although these slides are really just supplemental to my story, you can email me at griffin.bridgers@gmail.com if you would like a copy of the slides. Now, enough on the intro, a little bit on my story. So, as you may or may not know, I am a tax and estate planning attorney in the Denver, Colorado area. I'm a partner with the law firm of Hutchins and Associates, and I do mainly tax and estate planning for high and ultra high net worth individuals and families. So how did I get here? Well, it all started with a passion for tax law. So I went to NYU to get my tax LLM, and I finished that program in the spring of 2009, which, as you can imagine, was in the midst of the recession. In fact, we had only started to climb out of the market low that had hit in January of that year. And because of that, I had few, if any, prospects. I struck out on big law, on-campus interviews, and with any sort of applications I had done while in the tax LLM program. And kind of my mistake was, while I was there, I only really focused on big law firms other than some smaller firms in my home state of Tennessee. So, through some organic applications while I was in the tax LLM program, which were very generic, I generated some interest from firms in my home state, but they really had no urgency in making a hire, and a number of them ended up not even making a hire. Perhaps this is an unfair judgment of those firms, but a lot of them just jerked me around for the whole spring and summer. And I kind of hit a point where midway through the summer, I'd had a conversation with another attorney as part of networking. That attorney just told me at the time, look, nobody is hiring. You're probably going to have to go out on your own, and you may have to look at something other than tax law. That was extremely depressing, because at the time, I'd been, in law school now for 4 years between the JD and the LLM. Tax law was my passion, and I couldn't stomach having to do something other than that, or having to take on the economic risk of going out on my own. And more than the economic risk was the reputation risk. And you'll see how this factors in a minute. Because at that age especially, reputation was important to me, but it was really an artificial type of boogeyman that I'd built up in my mind. And it was important because I didn't want to be perceived as a failure by my classmates or by the legal community for having to go out on my own, for not fitting into big law or into any sort of law firm. But all that kind of started to change, and I'll never forget this evening, because it was July 6, 2009. I went out to dinner with some friends. That was kind of an escape from the situation I found myself in, but I was facing maybe taking on a matter to go out on my own for the first time, or doubling down on the job search. And I got home from that dinner, and I remember just sitting down in my room and just kind of getting hit with this, okay, this is your reality, Griffin. You can't float along in this delusion anymore of maybe this job's going to come down the road, or maybe one of these loose prospects in the background is going to pan out. You've got to do something about your situation and start to own it. And with that, something in me snapped. So what I decided is that, look, I'm willing to accept the worst case that I have to go out on my own. And I'm not bashing that option at all, because remember, at that time I was colored by this artificial reputation thing of it would be a failure for me to have to go out on my own. So what I decided to do was make every firm in the country reject me. And that was one key mindset shift that helped, because I was no longer operating with the goal of getting a job. Instead, my goal was proving to myself and to others that I had done everything in my power to get a job. And this was selfish, because really what I wanted to prove to myself and to others that I was truly this special exception to the rule. I was this special snowflake who had been marked for failure in the world and wasn't going to be able to get a job, unlike everybody else. So here's what I did, and I truly think this is one real key to my success, was the process. So what I did is I used Martindale-Hubbell as a research tool. So you can go on and search firms, or you used to be able to. I haven't actually looked at the Martindale website in years since they've been acquired by Avvo. But what I did is I went state by state finding firms who had tax attorneys on staff who held a tax LLM. So what I do is I just go state by state and, look at all these firms, and then with each I'd identify the lead tax attorney in that firm and email my resume. Now, contrary to popular advice, I didn't have a customized, tailored cover letter. I really just used a form email for each firm, and really all I did was change the name of who the email was addressed to and the state in which the firm was located, because I mentioned I was willing to take the bar in that state as soon as possible, because I was only licensed in Tennessee at the time. So there's a couple things that worked and didn't work. One is I just used blunt honesty, and this is what I got a lot of responsiveness to, because in each email I recognized, what is that firm feeling, how do I identify with them and their situation and have that level of empathy. So what I did is I just had a line where really leading off the second paragraph was recognizing that the recession had probably affected many firms, and they may be in that boat, and as a result they're probably not looking to make a hire, but I just wanted to throw my name in the hat just on the off chance they see a need for an entry-level tax associate. And I had a number of people respond and just say, hey, we'd love to have you. We just don't have the need, like you said in your email. So I had a lot of response on that end, even though it was a rejection. It wasn't the form letter type of rejection you'd otherwise get. Now, what didn't work is, and this is kind of weird to me now that I look back, is that I expressed a networking desire to just stay in touch wherever I landed, and also, in the meantime, be a resource maybe for any research or articles they wanted to write. And that didn't work, I think, just because I was a product of the times. Nobody really had that on their mind. They were more thinking, how do we keep our firm afloat? And most importantly, I think, was the subject line of the email. And that's important because it was an email. And I think I encouraged firms to open my email by having a very descriptive subject line to the effect of, I don't know if this was the exact one, but it was, along these lines, that graduate of NYU tax LLM program seeking attorney position. And that told exactly what the email was about, just in case they wanted to open it. And it kind of highlighted that NYU tax LLM credential, that I was a graduate, and that I was on the market. So with that being said, and since I was going to tax attorneys, that would have piqued their interest as well. And because I had this process of identifying firms and emailing resumes down to a system, I was able to generate a large number of emails to firms, probably approaching 1,000. So what I did is throughout July of 2009, I just set a goal of sending 50 resumes a day. And that was only during business days. I didn't do this on the weekend. I gave myself a break. And I'd stop once I got to 50 in a day, just so I wouldn't get overwhelmed with the process. Because to me, this was a marathon and not a sprint. And incremental progress was important. Now, it's important to note, too, this wasn't without peril. I remember this extremely embarrassing situation I ran into where on the same day I had emailed firms in Ohio and Georgia. And then the next day I got an inquiry from a firm, and I didn't really read into the firm or where it was any. I just was excited. I'm like, cool, somebody's interested. And I rushed into making a response because the firm was asking about my ties to Columbus. Well, I should have checked twice because it turns out that I rambled on in this response explaining my ties to Columbus, Ohio, but lo and behold, the firm was in Columbus, Georgia. So my worst fear, as I'm going to explain in a minute, was kind of, captured in that email, but it actually ended up being one of those that allowed me to double down. But what I ended up doing with that is kind of going back with egg on my face and replying back to the attorney and said, look, I ran off at the mouth with this hasty response explaining ties to the wrong city. Look, I know that affects my professional reputation and the way you view me. So I know attention to detail is a quality in a tax attorney that you probably seek, and I'm not showing it there. So respectfully, I'm just going to pull my resume from the process and save you the work. Now, that being said, speaking of reputation, I mentioned earlier that that was a big thing for me, and that was artificial. What I ultimately had to do, the second mind shift that helped me, was to stop caring what the legal community might think of me, because really, I wasn't alone. I was one of thousands of students seeking a job. So, to me, there was no shame in spamming email boxes. But nevertheless, I still had this they in my head, and you may have the same. You have a they in your head, and you're always thinking about what they may say, what they may think. And they is really a monolith that is the collective of people in a community. And for me, I had this they where I envisioned this entire legal community who gets fed up with me spamming their inbox with applications, and somehow they get together and ask about me and smear my name, and everybody starts talking about, man, have you seen this joker Griffin who's reaching out to all these firms? Man, what a loser. And all of a sudden my name is smeared nationwide. Now that in and of itself, really would take a narcissistic community of individuals to do. And in and of itself, what I realized is that was narcissistic for me, just because to even think people would think about me at that level and care that much and go out of their way to smear my name was really just kind of a selfish excuse on my end to preserve this delusion of being important, and this delusion that my artificial idea of reputation was indeed important. So letting go of this idea of this they floating out there really gave me the freedom to proceed. So I did this process for a long time, and ultimately, how did my story end? Well, I had perfect timing in landing my resume in front of a 7-attorney firm in Denver, which practiced tax and estate planning and had a hiring need at the time. So, scheduled a phone interview. I was bluntly honest in it about both my lack of experience and my desire, especially being new to Denver, to get out and get involved in the community. And little did I know this was by accident, but this really checked the boxes of what my firm, and for that matter, most small firms need in terms of somebody who's willing to get involved, build their name, build their reputation, ironically, and build a practice and generate business. So based on that, I got a follow-up in-person interview. I flew out to Denver. It was the first time I visited the city, and I nailed the interview, mainly because I had a plan. I had a plan that I'd researched in advance for the logistics. How would I make this the least painful on my firm that I could, even though I was moving halfway across the country? So I explained how I would move, how quickly I could do so, how quickly I could get set up, how quickly I could start the job, and my goal of taking the February bar. And all that worked out. And 1 week after my interview, I received competing offers, one as a contract attorney in Nashville and one as a full-time associate in Denver. From there, the choice was obvious for me. And now here I sit, almost 12 years later, now as a partner in my firm in Denver. So there's hope for you yet. If you're a law student or even an attorney, I want to help because I think there's a lot of room to refine and redefine the job search process for attorneys out there. For one, instead of seeking firms, I think it's important to seek attorneys who are leaders in their field and really seek to do maybe free work for them. Now, you can't really necessarily do free legal work, but you can do free brand building work for the attorneys and not for yourself. And with that being said, I think the term building your brand is overblown. That's one of those catchphrases. Instead, what I like to think of it is it helps to build your IP, in other words, your intellectual property. So if you're interested in an area of law, create content in that area to show your ability to research it, learn about it, and get your thoughts onto paper. And you may also use that as a network opportunity to collaborate with attorneys who are leaders in that field of law to co-create content in that area. Now, a lot of people look at that and want to keep their options open and think, I don't want to pick the wrong area of law. I'm not interested in anything. Well, there's no risk here. There's no risk of picking the wrong area of law because once you master this process of building your IP, it's easy to quickly shift that to other areas of law if the one you picked originally just doesn't interest you. So you can keep experimenting, keep reinventing yourself every once in a while until you land on that area that you're passionate about. Now, one thing that might help in some cases is bar association involvement to generate IP and build this network, but perhaps this is an unfair judgment on my part. In my experience working with the Bar Association and a number of trade groups, there's a lot of gatekeepers you have to deal with, and it tends to be easier to work with people one-on-one instead of having to deal with the gatekeepers that you have to get through who kind of view the Bar Association or the local group as their own fiefdom over which they can exert power and preference as to who they work with. And that's part of my passion of helping law students, is helping them find a way to bypass those gatekeepers. Now, I recognize that yes, I was lucky enough to have a credential that gave my resume a second look in the form of a tax LLM from NYU, but ultimately my hook was the subject line. How do you get somebody to open your resume? How do you get somebody to look at you? So the big question is, how does your IP make you different from the hundreds of other resumes? The credential in and of itself was my own IP that allowed me to bypass having to create content, but perhaps if you have content you've created, if you created your own IP and built it, how can you use that to make yourself different from the hundreds of other resumes? Get that across, and you will move to the top of the pile, I guarantee. As always, if you have questions or topic suggestions, you can email those to me at griffin.bridgers@gmail.com. And if you'd like help in your job search, I'm happy to provide free advice. Please email me for that as well. Thank you again for listening to this 10 plus minutes with Griffin, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.